All right. So I'm starting with this idea of actually expressing the things that are going on in my mind. That's why I'm calling it an inner dialogue. But over the years, what is the questions that I'm asking about? What are the interests that I've had for a long time? And maybe there's no answers to the big questions that I'm always thinking about. So first of all, you know I'm from Nebraska. I actually was born in Omaha. I'm still in Nebraska. I grew up in Nebraska. We were taking family vacations, driving around the Midwest in our Vista Cruiser. Certainly growing up in the 50s is my heritage, but I actually think that cruising kind of placed a sense of location, what the map looked like. Certainly I am a product of the era, which involved everything from the sense of modern and plastic naugahyde and the futuristic life where we were all going to be flying around in cars by now. But I think those things also made my work what it is, that kind of era and that time. And I've got two comparisons here. The upper image is of a tablecloth that I painted for my mother when I was in 3rd grade. And ironically, the way I made that is similar to what I do now. Not from the woodblock part, but to use a paper stencil and brush color through the stencil onto the surface. So I still use paper stencils onto my wood blocks and isolate colors. So this is a very recent print, a beautiful Persian flower that's done in a color reduction woodblock method with usually 2 blocks and lots of stages and use of paper stencils. So I'd like to begin with the idea that my images originate from sketches, from drawings, from doodles. And here you're seeing an array of these little thumbnail sketches. They all have a strong characteristic of the graphic nature, the graphic instinct that I have. But those sketches then become the basis of the composition for my prints. I usually draw them to life size, the size of the paper that I'm going to work on. So you see an array of these large drawings done with graphite. I don't ever like to do any of my sketches in color. It always begins just in the black and white so that I can see that graphic impact that I'm after. So here it is in the finished print, formulae. It's still that striking impact that I can get, but I want to explore the colors instinctually and not have them predetermined. Then I think another important striking element for me is the idea of the shapes, how the shapes work as kind of thinking on the flat level and how they repeat themselves within the composition and how the composition then has connections across the space. So there's a red shape and it's echo in the black one. When I started, I was thinking of them as just kind of geometric, formal engagement of shifting and playing with those shapes. Now over time, I think those shapes have meaning to me. I've seen them out in the world. I've seen them mean different things, like this stack of, is it boards, construction materials? I am thinking as I'm looking out in the world and seeing these shapes that I then respond to, and now I can actually say, oh, they really exist because I've trained my eye to look for them. I see it certainly in nature and the nature forms, the kind of silhouetted stark branches that is a pleasure in the winter in Nebraska, to be able to have no leaves on the trees and see that inner structure silhouetted against the sky. And then these 2 prints I just finished this summer. Again, the tree metaphor has come back. And I did some reading about actually how tree branches and leaves are forming. What's the scientific triggers that make this node turn into a branch? But that question of the paper becomes so interesting to me that often I have a private game where I leave unprinted areas of the paper so that they stay by themselves and they have to enter into the work, and you get the physical ink on and the depth down into the base of the paper itself. This was a series of prints in where I'm literally printing on front and back of the paper. Some of the works got turned into an artist's book, and others I did an installation presentation where they were installed with magnets zigzagging across the wall, and then the light could shine through behind, and so the paper became this melded interaction between the front and the back and the quality of light. But that's a question that I'm interested in is, well, what can you print on? Where does the print exist? And in this instance, it was a group of found postcards that I collected in Iceland. I've done it from some postcards I've collected in Italy or Japan, and then imposed my image on top of the postcard itself and kind of had an interaction with the found culture. So here I want to talk to you again a little bit about how I make my prints. I carve into the surface of a plywood block. I just use birch plywoods, and here's an example again where, yeah, it's really gestural. I'm cutting, I'm gouging. I like to mostly do everything by hand now. I don't like to use electrical tools. And then I use a paper stencil on the wood block, and that's what we have on the bed of the press here. Brown craft paper with holes cut in it, very simple. I'm putting color onto the wood block through the paper stencils. Often I begin my prints that way because I'm not going to ink up everything right away. I want to save some things for later. It works in stages. If I put color over everything, then I'd be fighting those first colors, and I want to try and embed as many colors as I can against the white of the paper. And once I take that paper stencil off, then I see the ink on the wood block, and there's opportunity to do some modulation, some changing. I use my hands, I do blending, I do wipeouts, I can add more color. I can add color without a stencil. Certainly, of course, you can. But those early stages look very spare, very empty. You can't really get rewarding qualities until it starts building up about maybe over halfway. Then the print starts looking exciting, and then I can tell what I want to do. Here's actually a breakdown of a recent print. I forgot to put this one in my portfolio, so you don't get to see it, but you can kind of see this breakdown there across the center of all those different stages, and I know it's going to accumulate to something. And then my question is, when is it done? How do I know to stop? And actually, it's a very interesting point when I don't have any questions anymore. So I think I'm really trying to build in my prints a physical quality to how the ink is that's so interesting and beautiful and impossible to capture in any way other than through printing. About 4 years ago is when I decided I needed to buy a building and create my own print center. And this plan, it meant that I had to write a business plan. I had to get a bank loan. I spent a lot of money buying a building. And the first thing before we could even get in the building is to paint the mural, because it needed something on the side, and it created a very striking landmark on the eastern edge of downtown Lincoln. Now I've been open for 2.5 years, and I've had good activities and people coming for workshops, artist residencies, exhibitions. I have a musical performance there even, beautiful exhibitions that I've curated. So Constellation Studios is really my big major production right now, and you're all invited to come. Please come and see me in Lincoln. Thank you very much.